Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Judy Laster. I'm the director of the Woods Hole Film Festival, and this is our 30th edition. The panel this afternoon is one that is so exciting for us to be able to present. We're presenting it under the auspices of our Film and Science Initiative, which is an initiative we started a number of years ago with the purpose of bringing together filmmakers and scientists to ultimately tell better stories about science on film. And the initiative has several aspects of it. One is to really create a space for collaboration to occur. The other is to create opportunities for us to show films about science to the public. The other part of it is to really become known in Woods Hole and at the Woods Hole Film Festival as a place where people who are interested in telling stories at the intersection of film and science can come, so that we can all create a community of people with like-minded interests to be able to work together, share ideas, create content, and ultimately create a platform that then allows the work that is done to be seen by a larger audience. So I'm going to turn over the panel this afternoon to Megan Sanchez-Warner, who is our moderator. She will introduce everybody here. But I would just like to say that our Film and Science Initiative is a really exciting place. With this festival, we have 2 films that are represented by the filmmakers here that are the first real productions that we've been able to make under this initiative. And I hope that everyone will get a chance to see them. The festival goes through Saturday, August 7th. The films can be seen on the virtual platform through Sunday, August 8th. So without further ado, thank you, Megan. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Judy. I am also thrilled to be part of this panel. I'm a board member of the Film Festival, and when Judy first mentioned the idea being floated around, I thought this is an idea that is perfect for the Woods Hole Film Festival with our close ties here to such amazing scientific institutions right in Woods Hole. So I am thrilled to be, as a board member, part of seeing this Science and Film Initiative grow and really come to light, and thrilled to see the first films that are coming out of it. So thank you so much, Judy. We are joined today. First of all, I'd like to introduce Alexis Gambis, who is our 2021 filmmaker in residence. He also is showing his, he also is a scientist, and he is a filmmaker, and his film that is showing in the festival is Son of Monarchs. We are also joined by Nipam Patel, who is the director of the Marine Biological Laboratory, and that is right here in Woods Hole. And we're so very thrilled to have Nipam join us. And he is also very interested in film and works with film, of course, in scientific capacity. We also are joined by Beth Murphy, who is head of Principal Pictures. She is a filmmaker, is also a board member of the Woods Hole Film Festival, and Beth is doing one of our Science and Film Initiative first films project that showed here in the festival. That is the short called Our Future, Our Fight, and this is the first of the series on wildfires. She can tell you about that. And then we're also joined by Josh Septel, who is a filmmaker out of his company is Smarty Pants Brooklyn. And his film is also one of our Science and Film projects, and that one is Bruce and Alvin. And he will be able to tell you all about that. Very exciting project. I would love to, since we started with that, have everyone, the filmmakers, please introduce your films, talk about the films you made that are here in the festival. I think we have a couple of clips to show. And then we would like to talk about the experiences regarding that. So I'm going to start with Beth Murphy, and I'm handing it over to you, Beth.
Great. Hi, thanks, Megan, and thanks, Judy, for bringing us all together, and for the work of the Woods Hole Film and Science Initiative, because that has been really the catalyst for some of the work that we've been doing together. And here at the festival this year, we are showing Our Future, Our Fight, which is the pilot episode in a series that brings together young climate activists and climate scientists. And I'll go ahead and why don't we just go ahead and show a very short clip. It's a little bit of the opening of the film to see. So in every episode of Our Future, Our Fight, we plan to tackle a different aspect of climate change. We're focused on wildfires in the premiere episode because it's wildfires that inspired the young activist who's being featured to get involved. That's what motivated him to action, seeing the wildfires in his backyard in California. So our goal is really to try to connect the dots globally and show that, you know, what is happening in our own backyards is playing out all over the world. And part of the inspiration for the approach, you know, bringing together an activist with a scientist, was the words of, you know, Greta Thunberg, who said, you know, don't listen to me, listen to the scientists. And so, you know, the scientific understanding of what's happening with climate change is really the underpinning of all of the activism that these young people are doing around the world. And yet they'll often be the first to admit that, you know, they don't fully understand the science or know it in such a detailed way, and they would love to learn more about it. And so going into the field with the scientists gives them an opportunity to learn more and be able to, you know, share their passion with a little bit more depth. And it also gives the scientist an opportunity to learn from the activists, and it gives the scientists an opportunity to have their science communicated to a larger audience in a way that they might not otherwise be able to do, or to access audiences that they might not otherwise be accessing. So, so we're really, you know, excited about this combination. And we did have a lot of challenges with the production during COVID for this pilot episode. We were planning in April of 2020. Jonah, who you saw, the young activist, we were planning for him to travel to Brazil with a climate scientist from Woods Hole, Marcia Macedo, who works at the Woodwell Climate Research Center. And we were looking forward to that. That's where her research is. And she's, you know, studying wildfires there in the Brazilian Amazon, and, you know, be able to make that link to what's happening in California and other places around the world. The trip got, you know, postponed many times, and it became clear that that was, you know, never going to happen during COVID. And so so we adapted, and the entire episode now is taking place in California. And I actually love the way it has evolved. I mean, with the work that would have been done in Brazil, there would have been an emphasis on the indigenous knowledge that exists there to protect the land and help to keep, and things that are done to help keep wildfires at bay. And that is indeed the shift that we made in California, to also focus on that indigenous scientific knowledge. So, so we, if we were asked to, as we're going out and trying to, sell the series to different outlets, there is the possibility that we'll be asked to make it longer to fit into their schedules. Right now it's running about 20 minutes. And, were we asked to make a broadcast hour, we would do that by getting the scientists and the young activists on the road together, having kind of a science and a travel show. I think just share a little bit of my hopes for the project. As you could tell, we're trying to have some fun with it, make it really energetic and exciting, and to really highlight how inspiring it is. I mean, I myself am so inspired by the stories of these young activists and what they're doing and the leadership that they're showing around the world. And so I really hope that this could be some intergenerational watching, that it's really fun for adults to see cool things that kids are doing, and for kids to see themselves in these kids and see that, they very easily can make a difference on this issue and in the world. So, so we'll see. We're just at the beginning stages of trying to get it out into the world. And it was really awesome to have the pilot premiere at the festival this year.
Beth, thank you so much. I just realized that the sound could not be heard on that clip to everyone, and so I would like to play that again so that we have the opportunity to hear the sound. And so much for the technical snafu on our part. Here it comes again. Just one moment.
This is California, home to famous celebrities, beautiful beaches, Disneyland, and raging, dangerous, deadly wildfires. Hey, I'm Jonah, first-year college student at UC Berkeley, average athlete, brother to these two. I also happen to be a climate activist, which is really just a kid who's tackling climate action and challenging climate inaction.
We deserve representation in our government, we deserve a voice, and we deserve to have people fighting for us.
Why? Because I'm worried. Worried that my friends and I won't have a planet to grow up on.
These young people, they already recycle. They use metal straws instead of plastic, but they realize that is not enough.
Kids can do everything to make the world a better place.
Wildfires made worse by climate change are destroying millions of acres of land on California's west coast. Incinerating businesses, schools, entire neighborhoods. This is my house in Northern California, just miles from a fire zone. That's my family having dinner. Aren't they great? Well, it didn't feel so great a few years ago, when a wildfire crept so close to our house that we had to stay locked up inside with the window shut and fans blowing for weeks. Yep, we were rocking masks before the pandemic. Those wildfires in my backyard, they're only going to get worse in the future, unless we take action now.
Thank you so much for playing that again. And Beth, thank you.
Thank you.
Much more energetic and exciting with the sound.
I thought it was just me.
So next, I would like to have Josh Feptel announce, and we'd like to show a clip for his piece. Josh also has a film from the Science and Film Initiative. He can tell you all about that. Josh?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much, Megan, and thank you, Judy, for having me on this panel. Yeah, this project is, it's very close to Woods Hole because it's about someone who works at the Oceanographic Institute. The title of the film has two names in it. The first name is Bruce, which is referring to Bruce Strickrot, who's the the lead pilot on the submarine program there. And Alvin, the second name, is the name of Woods Hole's submarine, which is, I believe it's 56 years old now, and has been has been an iconic submarine in popular culture and in science. And so why don't we watch the trail? We're going to show you the trailer for the film, I think, or some other clip, but we'll see, and then I can tell you more.
There are things that could happen that could cause us a significant emergency. In the grand scheme of things, we're putting a machine in some of the deepest parts of the ocean with people in it, and there's always an opportunity for a critical failure that could cost us our lives. We don't want to deny that.
There it is.
The nature of being human is going and doing extreme things. That's what we're best at doing. I'm an advocate for never giving that up.
Yeah. So the story is really, to me, was about a man and a machine, and what they are able to do together, what they're able to achieve together, and that was the focus. I started out as a high school science teacher. That was my first job. So I've always really loved science and science education. And then when I became a filmmaker, I thought a lot about how to tell science stories and how to tell them in an effective way. And to me, in many ways, they're no different than any other story. Every scientist, in a way, is on a quest, and there are stakes. There's a journey. There are failures and successes, and so that's how I think of all science stories. But this one in particular, they literally are going on a journey that you can see to the depths of the ocean. I mean, the submarine goes, 4 miles down to the deepest parts of the ocean, to places that no one has ever been before. So that's, that was exciting to me, and high stakes, because it's people are risking their lives to do this. So yeah, that's a little about Bruce and Alvin.
Josh, thank you so much. One thing, just a side note that I noticed while watching that film, and I'd heard this before, that that for those who are in the audience who haven't had the opportunity yet to see the film, what I love is that we know less about the ocean than we do about the moon at this point, and I think that's so fascinating. And so the exploration and diving into the science, literally diving into the ocean, is it was really remarkable to see. So I hope everyone has the opportunity to see it who has not seen it already. I would like to ask Alexis to tell us a little bit about the film Son of Monarchs that he has in the festival, as well as Alexis in particular, being a scientist who turned into a filmmaker. And Josh, it seems like you had a similar experience. I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and and whether it's I think you might have how much you bring it into your film.
Yeah, thank you so much for, can you hear me okay? Is it working, volume-wise? Yeah, thank you, Megan, thank you, Judy, for having me. I'm also honored to be the filmmaker in residence this year at Woods Hole. Unfortunately, I don't have a trailer of the film, but the film is playing in the festival. But a little bit about my background. So I started out as a biologist. I'm a sort of an evolutionary biologist. I did a PhD at Rockefeller, and then I got interested in science communication, but also telling stories around science, and especially, using the laboratory and imagery taken from the lab as sort of a stepping platform to make fiction. That's sort of something that I'm very interested in is how to transform scientific data and the life of scientists into stories. And in the process of doing so, doing documentary work and research, but actually using that as kind of a stepping ground to then make fiction and create stories and fictional stories. I oftentimes refer to my work as science in fiction, not necessarily science fiction, but how to incorporate real science and also incorporate elements of magical realism and dreamscapes, and oftentimes using the imagery from the microscope. And with Nepal, we can talk a little bit more about that. But how the microscopy and how data can be used as a way of also entering into those kind of alternate worlds a little bit. And I have two connections with Woods Hole. The first one is my first feature was called The Fly Room, which was about the birthplace of genetics in New York at Columbia University in the 1920s. And just as a side note, the Fly Room and what was referred to as the Morgan Group and the Fly Boys, the people that used to work in the lab, Calvin Bridges and Alfred Sturdivant, they used to come to Woods Hole in the summers because it was too hot at Columbia. So they used to put the fruit flies in these barrels, and they used to take the train to Woods Hole, and they would spend the summer at MBL and work out of MBL. And Thomas Hunt Morgan was known for being there, and Alfred Sturdivant would catch fruit flies with his nets. And so at some point in the making of that film, I was hoping to shoot some scenes at Woods Hole, but never actually worked out. Also because it was very hard to recreate. It's a period film from the 1920s, so we had to most of the film takes place in one room, in the Fly Room that we recreated in New York City with some of the exteriors at Columbia. And then the other connection is Nepal. As part of the work that I do, I oftentimes focus on animals as a metaphor to get into stories. And so my first film was about fruit flies because I did my PhD on fruit flies. I spent 8 years working on fruit flies, so I had this deep affinity, and that led me to make my first film. And my second film, which is playing at the festival, is called Son of Monarchs. And it's a film about not only the migration of monarch butterflies, but also how butterflies, what dictates the color and the patterns that butterflies have. The genetic underpinnings of, why do butterflies have certain colors? Why do they have certain patterns? And part of the work that I did was to interview many scientists. And Nepal, a few years ago, I went to see, we spoke and I interviewed him as part of the making of the film. And what I ended up happening is that I use a lot of the information that I get from interviews with Nepal and other scientists to then start creating a story. And my film is really about the monarch butterfly as a metaphor to speak about immigration, to speak about race, to speak about living between countries. And just a little synopsis of the film. It's the story of a Mexican scientist, which we don't often see in films, like a PhD scientist who lives in New York and basically has to return home to Mexico because his grandmother dies. And that sparks sort of a metamorphosis. He doesn't really know where he belongs. He kind of straddles two countries. And to not give up too much away in the film, he starts identifying with the monarch butterfly because he grew up near the butterfly forest in Mexico, and he works in a butterfly lab, an evolutionary biology lab, and he sort of starts transforming into a butterfly to some extent, both emotionally, spiritually, and also physically, which I won't say too much about that, but there is a transformation that happens with that. And just to kind of go off of what Josh was saying, I'm really interested in representation, and how we can create, scientists as heroes, but also as human beings, and humanize the scientists, and how we can connect the research to personal story, to personal tragedy, to romance. Also thinking about the cultural aspect to science, like how is science perceived in different parts of the world, but also what makes it universal at the same time. And I'm really inspired by scientific data, especially microscopy, and I use that a lot in my films. So yeah, very excited to have the film in the festival, and it will then, it played at Sundance, and we were lucky to receive the Sloan Award for the best science film at Sundance, and it's going to premiere on HBO in November. So very, very excited to be here with all of you. And I should also mention on a side note, in addition to making films, I also run a film festival in New York called Imagine Science, which is all about same idea. It's about kind of the idea is trying to redefine or expand our definition of what a science film is. That it's not only fiction or documentary, it can be hybrid work, it can be scientific data. And so our festival is all about broadening, the richness of what a science film can be. So, thank you.
Alexis, thank you so much. And I hope that the viewers who have not had the opportunity to see Son of Monarchs at the festival, that they're able to see it on HBO in November. The imagery is amazing, and of course, with the beauty of a fiction film is that you can really, as you did, take the imagery and the metaphor and really expand it. But I'd love to have Nipam talk a bit about science and how images and visuals, because the visuals are so amazing, and like you said, the slides and looking down the slides and at the science, as a Nipam, as a scientist, how does visual story or visuals influence your science?
Yeah, I think I got interested in photography when I was a young kid, and in some ways, the science I do is almost an extension of that love. As Alexis said, it's fantastic to see the world through microscopes, through various ways that we visualize things in science experiments. And I think it's really quite beautiful, and it makes for a compelling way to tell stories. And sometimes even if it's not a story, it's just visually stunning and great to look at and to think about explore the natural world. And so I'm really continue to be very excited about that intersection of science and film as, ways to use it, like, Alexis did, as both an actual, I think that these three films were so much fun because they really give you three different ways to think about the intersection of science and film and art. So you have one film that, the Alvin story, that talks about the incredible just joy and fantastic discoveries that go on. And then you have, the film on Wildfire, which is a really important story to tell, and then finds a novel way to tell that story with the science through the eyes of a young activist. And then you have Alexis's film, which is a real story, but just science is completely woven through it. A real story in the sense that, it's a piece of fictional work with a completely different purpose that didn't have to have a science theme to it, but it does. It integrates it really nicely. In that it's realistic. I love the scene where sorry if I think everyone's going to see it, so it's great, but it's like where the young man makes a fantastic publication and he's depressed for other reasons, and that's real science too. But I think that, all of the films really also show the amazing power of imagery, of, forest burning, of beautiful things underwater, of butterfly wings developing. And I think it's a great way to capture the imagination of the public, but then use that as an avenue to really talk about important issues.
Thank you so much. And also, as a reminder, Nepal is the director of the Marine Biological Laboratory, which is here in Woods Hole. And Nepal, I would love to hear if there's anything within, MBL, Marine Biological Laboratory, that you all are, how film or some of the scientists that are in MBL, how film can influence science. We know how science can influence film, but I'd love to hear a little bit about the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, film as a media helps us to think in sort of expansive ways about how we connect to the world. We're trying to do some additional things now of generating footage that we think is really beautiful, but we would like filmmakers to find creative uses for it that are outside our way of thinking. So I think that those are things that I'm really excited about, would like to see going forward. But, film is wonderful too, because it really expands the imagination. So, I think a good example is in science fiction. Films come up with all of these crazy things that 20 years ago we would have said, well, that's science fiction, that's never happening. And now you look at it today. And sometimes I think that scientists are even inspired by some of the things that they see in film and say, well, maybe we could do that. That's something to think about. So.
Thank you, Deepam. I would love to just ask filmmakers, we have so many great stories that are in science, and how do you, what's the process of finding the story within a concept? First, talking through what is the, a concept when you decide to do something around film. How do you find the story in it? What makes a good story? And including science in it, and Alexis, you might also be able to talk about this, how much, we use a lot of creative leeway as filmmakers. How much creative leeway when you are working with scientific, which is fact-based. So I'd love to talk about that. I would love to have, since I started with Beth, with your film, if we could, Beth, have you talk a little bit about finding the story within a science-based project, and then I'll go to Josh after that.
Yeah. Sure, happy to. I mean, for me, it's all about really character-driven storytelling. So that tends to be my approach to all of my work, which is just, very intimate, character-driven storytelling. Oftentimes I'm making verite films, or, whether they're, features or shorts, and, we're just, following the action as it kind of plays out. This is a little bit different. I mean, there are, the characters in the film and real people that we're following, but we are setting up the scenario for them. So we are bringing them together. We're deciding, who the, not only who the climate activist is, but also who is the scientist or the scientist that we are then pairing with that activist, to try to have, the most impact with the storytelling, and to be able to, as I said, connect the dots globally in the way that we would like to. So, so we have a whole plan laid out for the whole series, and even into a season 2. And, we're just, very, really excited about the stories that we'll be able to tell. The second film in the series is focused on a young woman in Minneapolis who is fighting against environmental racism. And her family is originally from Somalia, and she's an activist there. She started looking at the rates of asthma and other kind of health problems that were happening in her community, and connecting the dots there with what was happening with racism, and has done some just really extraordinary work, I think, in opening people's eyes in her community and having some success with some of the things that they were fighting against. And there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, it was an issue before COVID, but things were really exacerbated during the pandemic. And I think, on this issue really exposed. So, for example, in a lot of communities of color, for example, where there were higher rates of COVID, where there were these environmental impacts connected to climate change and, higher rates of asthma, for example, in those communities. Not only were there higher rates of COVID, but also higher death rates from COVID. And so all of this intertwining of, people's personal lives and science. I mean, science touches our lives in virtually, every single way. And I think it's about, for me, it's the people who make that accessible to a larger audience.
That's a quick question. I noticed that in our Future Our Fight, in the wildfire episode, that you had a climate scientist from Woods Hole. Is that
Yes.
Something that you will have in future episodes, or you don't know yet at this point?
Yeah, I think, as it happens organically, I think, if there are researchers in Woods Hole who are studying, what were the stories that were the science that we're looking to feature with the climate activists, then great. But it won't be in every episode.
Well, there's certainly so many in documentaries. Of course, there's so many experts in this amazing town of Woods Hole. So
it's truly incredible. It's a gift to our community and to our storytelling adventures.
Josh, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about with Alvin, finding the story in there. If you could kind of talk about which came first, Bruce or Alvin? Like, how did you find the story there?
So they kind of came hand in hand. I spoke with Bruce and was just immediately kind of mesmerized. He's a great storyteller, incredibly thoughtful person with lots of deep thoughts and philosophies about life and exploration and science and technology. And so, I immediately, our first phone call, I think, was like 2.5 hours long. And I immediately knew that, he was a great character for a film. And, because that, as Beth said, it's character in any kind of film, you need good characters for it to work usually. And so that checked one box, right? And then the other thing that's good to have is stakes. What's at stake? In Beth's story, obviously the future of the planet is at stake. So that's a powerful story to tell. In Bruce and Alvin, the stakes are, on one hand, you could die going down the ocean that deep, but I think what's higher stakes is what they could possibly discover, and what that could mean for the future of understanding our planet. And at one point in the film, Bruce talks about how one of the discoveries that was made with Alvin actually led to our ability to test for COVID-19. And so it was, it was science that was being done years ago, but that what they learned from that enabled them to do certain things that are relevant to things that people probably never imagined would be. So there's also this power in the quest of just discovering things for discovery's sake, because you never know what you might find and what it could lead to.
Josh, one thing I noticed watching Bruce and Alvin is the beautiful sense of wonder, the sense of wonder about the world, the sense of wonder about the ocean and everything in there, and really going into Bruce as a scientist and his, one childhood wonder about the world. And, the beauty of film here is that, you can approach a film many different ways, either from a pure, factual or documentary. And this, what I think works so well in this story is that sense of wonder. And so is there, at what point did you decide to kind of pivot in this or any film-based story, how do you find the angle in and the angle of the tone, I suppose, in approaching a scientific story?
Yeah, well, in Bruce's case, one of the first stories that he tells is about being a little boy and watching the mission to the moon, and that watching the spaceship, leave our orbit and astronauts land on the moon when Bruce was 4, was this indelible memory that I think is such a universal thing for anyone who understands the magnitude of going to the moon. It's very relatable, and that it is that sense of wonder, and it's that same sense of wonder that I think people can bring to science. And in the case of Alvin, doing that research. And so there were a lot of parallels between, space travel and travel to the bottom of the sea in Alvin. And I was really interested in that, in finding those parallels, and because I think it's a way in to understanding how cool Alvin is. It's like a spaceship for the ocean. And very similar in many ways, and so I think it's about always trying to find ways to make it relatable, and to make people's dreams relatable. He's dreamt of going into space, and then he ended up getting to go to the bottom of the ocean, and that was good enough for him. It's still this amazing, fantastic voyage that he gets to do all the time. And I think everyone kind of dreams of things like that. So to me, it's finding those really human desires and telling stories about that, putting the person first. Every scientist is a human being first. And to some people, I think science itself can feel like a foreign language, and so it's sometimes hard to communicate that part of the story to people. And so by leaning into the person first and finding a way to make them relatable, and to be able to see yourself in that character, for the viewer to be able to see themselves in that character, I find is often the way into telling good science stories. And then the next step is figuring out how to talk about the science in a way that is accessible and exciting, and it can be done, especially when you have a great character who's incredibly excited about it.
Absolutely. And of course, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of how much of this actually relates to Alexis as well, in that not only the sense of wonder, but that exactly what you're just talking about the person behind the science and the person behind the scientist. And Alexis, that's exactly, that was your a lot of your theme, and the transformation and what a person is going through, and using science as the backdrop. So I would love to hear a little bit in particular. Now you've done 2 films that have science in it, in finding the right into the story and using it in particular in your pieces as metaphor.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what was said. I think, characters, obviously our priority is to create characters that are relatable and human, And I think, I'm a big proponent in saying that documentary and fiction are actually quite similar in many ways. And the belief that fiction is not, the documentary is more factual than fiction. I think what's beautiful about fiction is that you have this ability to take traits from different people that you meet and different people that are part of the making process, whether it's research or whether it's documentation. And then it's a little bit like science, actually, because you have to deconstruct, you have to take something apart, and then you have to kind of rebuild characters that are kind of the embodiment of different things that you've picked up from different people. And then, you start sketching these characters, what is it? How did this character get into science? How did he get to New York? And in the case of this biologist, or, what was his childhood like, growing up in Mexico? And, why was he fascinated by butterflies? And, why does he want to fly? And then I started incorporating this trauma about water and about his parents dying in a flood. And so I think that's really something that I love doing, is kind of just creating these mosaics out of different elements. But in a lot of my work also, I incorporate real people in my film. So even though I do fiction, there are real scientists that are in the film. There are also under quotation marks, like non-actors that are also part of the process of making the film. Because I feel like film, no matter what, is a participatory endeavor, as research is to some extent. And I love, to what Nepal was saying, I really love scientific imagery for what it is sometimes, and sometimes not having to explain necessarily what you're seeing, but just kind of, fall into kind of the visual splendor, or even sometimes even the sonic, there could also be sounds incorporated with it. And I love this idea that you don't necessarily have to over-explain everything. And to your point, Megan, about where do I draw the line with fiction or with science fiction, I love playing with that line, flirting with what people believe to be true and not true. And I think that what I like to do is I incorporate these dream sequences in my films, and that's where I play with science fiction or magical realism. And a lot of those scenes are also conversations that I have with Nepal or other people that were part of the film. I asked them about their own dreams or their own aspirations, or what do they what do they fantasize about, or what do they think about? And based on that, I started developing these dream sequences where me as the filmmaker, I also have a little bit more freedom to play around with the form. And I think that's really beautiful, is to show something to somebody and say, this may look like science fiction, but actually this is all of the images that you're seeing are actually, for example, there's a scene where the scientist touches the window and it turns into a butterfly, like a developing butterfly wing. And that was imagery from De Palm's lab, and Aaron and Ryan from his lab that actually gave me that imagery to plaster over the window. So even though it's somewhat VFX, I'm using actual real imagery to create these dream sequences, or these moments of wonder in the film. And I think, some things that were mentioned by Josh also, like, how do you make the science exciting? Well, I think, there needs to be more emphasis on the process of doing science. And I think people working in a lab is so interesting, and there's a music to how you work, to how you use the microscope, and just giving justice to that world, and also finding ways in which you can create a parallel between the science, like the drama of the science, and the drama that people are going through. So, let's say somebody's going through like a breakup, and then you could somehow incorporate some imagery that plays into the breakup, and I think it's really interesting to try to find parallels between, because when I was a PhD student, or, I remember going to the lab and looking through the microscope as a way of meditating, or, mourning the loss of a loved one. It's an amazing place to kind of reflect on your life. And so I love to find the parallels between the scientific data and the footage and what's going on with the characters. But I agree with Josh and Beth. It's all about characters and trying to kind of create these characters that are both human and relatable. And my last point, and then I'll leave it to that. Sometimes with the science, it's better to not to just be technical about the science and have people appreciate the science almost like music. You don't necessarily have to understand what people are talking about if they're talking about CRISPR, but it just kind of floats in the background. And I love that, to not dumb down the science, but just have it play as if it was, you know, like a real lab meeting, for example. So anyway, there's a lot that I get very excited about this, because I think that there's a lot that can be done to create these parallels between the footage and these worlds. But fiction is beautiful, because you're almost like playing, I mean, to some extent playing God, because you're creating these characters out of different traits. So.
Can I just add one thought to that? Because I think it's so interesting to hear Alexis talk about like the dreaming part of it and the ethereal imagery, and because I think that is a part of science,
right?
And you know, like I remember when I was a pre-med student, my professor told me this story about Auguste Kekule, who discovered the benzene ring, and he was trying to figure out what was the structure of these 6 carbon molecules, and he kept thinking about it, and then he fell asleep. I think he was riding on a bus, and he fell asleep, and he had a dream about a snake that was eating its tail, and when he woke up, he realized, oh, the 6 carbon molecules must be in a ring shape, and so part of our quest for understanding things is about dreaming and imagining, and so I think there needs to be a space for that in the storytelling as well.
Yeah, and to that point, I think what Josh is saying is so true. I think sometimes it's better to not distill. You know, we have a tendency of wanting to distill, to go to the scientific discovery, but all of that stuff around discovery, the dreams, all of that needs to be part of those stories that we tell, I think. And because we want to, you know, we have this thing with science film, it's misleading sometimes, because we think that we have to inform and educate, but we also want to know all of these anecdotes, because that's what makes it relatable. That's what makes it human, is all of this other things. And they may seem tangential, but they're not. And that's what people will connect to, I think. So.
Now, I do at one point want to open it up to questions from the audience. So those who are in the audience, if you have any questions, if you could just put them in the chat or raise your hand. While we're waiting for that, Nipam, I have a question for you, which is, as scientists and in the scientific community, watching films that are based on science, you know, is there a sense of, okay, well, that didn't even scratch the surface, or that was incorrect, or, you know, how much is there, what's your, you know, as a viewer, when you're watching films that have to do with science, you know, what catches your interest, first of all, and then sometimes within the community, if you've heard, like, what is the reaction?
Well, I think it's like what you'd expect. When it's your field, you always are very nitpicky about, did they really get it right? And that's not really the point sometimes. I mean, there's the old joke that, you know, when a biologist watches something about physics, they just think it's fantastic. That was a great documentary. But, you know, the physicists would watch the same thing and say, no, that wasn't right. But I really liked Alexis's point too, that you don't have to get it all right. You don't have to try to explain it all, right? It can be out there, and then people can slowly begin to absorb the kind of information that's out there, and it becomes part of their vocabulary. They begin to understand it. I think, you know, that's the same thing with the other 2 films as well, right? There's points that are made. They don't have to be elaborated on in great detail, but I think people kind of begin to absorb that science. So I think scientists they're learning to appreciate that, you know, that gets out there into the world, and that becomes appreciated, that becomes knowledge. Then those conversations can continue, and you can go deeper for people that are really interested in that or have a reason to want to follow up. So I also want to, you know, follow up on one other thing that Alexis had pointed out too about, you know, often you can have this imagery, you don't need to explain it. It's the same sort of thing. It's like, you know, the science, it just goes. And I've put out a couple of short little bits of video just to see if anyone was interested in it. And like one of the ones I put out was just a really nice video of a frog going from 2 cells to hatching. And, you know, I just put it up there, no audio, nothing, no explanation, just this is a movie. And it, you know, amongst the scientific community, everyone thought, oh, it's really beautiful. And it got, you know, a couple thousand views. And then suddenly it got like millions of views because somebody in Japan put it up at a website and said it reminded them as a child of seeing tadpoles in a rice paddy. And then it was like, it connected with people in a way that never would have occurred to me, but people still see all these embryos developing. And then like thousands of people asked in the video, there are 3 embryos that don't develop properly and they die. And there were like thousands of people that wanted to know why those embryos die. And suddenly you have like a teaching moment. You can say, what goes wrong? It's the same thing that happens to, unfortunately, human embryos when they're very young. And so I think that's one of the great things is you can put this stuff out there and let the public imagination run with it.
It's so fascinating to me how now you see so much more, you know, with social media or, you know, YouTube or, you know, these clips that you see so many more things about science than I think like that I ever, you know, had been exposed to in my childhood. And I think that is one of the beauty of, you know, the visual images and visual stories. And I'm seeing the feeds, and yeah, it's really fascinating. And what people find inspiring is really interesting. Is that something? Does anybody want to talk about what has surprised you in terms of the things that people have been inspired by when you're telling films that have scientific?
Can I add one thing to what I think that's really interesting what Nepal was saying about how people interpret the footage, and just to add to that, I think what's also interesting is how, because what Nepal was mentioning at the beginning, how filmmakers may want to use that footage, you know, like the idea of reusing the footage in another context, which is again back to the point of, you know, you don't necessarily have to explain it, but also some people may want to use it. And I think we need to be, you know, sometimes because it's data, we want to use it in a very specific context, or maybe it was published, or maybe it has it's kind of like a sacred aspect to it. But I think what's beautiful is, you know, I know that, for example, Animal Collective, you know, was using all of this footage from like coral, this group called Coral Morphologic, and they made music videos with coral. And of course, in the 1920s and 30s, there was people making films with seahorses, you know, like Jean Painlevé and all these. So I think that I think it's also interesting to have filmmakers and artists and musicians have access to this footage to then kind of reinvent how they want to use it in a different context. I think that's something that I would love to see more of, for sure, and maybe educators as well.
Is that something that you see in the festival that you do? Do you see more, you know, people reusing footage, or do you see that in the films that you?
Yeah, I see that, and I also think that scientists should be, you know, that when they put out this footage, they should also be considered as filmmakers, you know. And I one of the things that we try to do with our festival is kind of democratize, you know, this idea that everybody is ultimately a filmmaker, and so sometimes videos are made by, you know, by people that don't necessarily have that much background in science, and sometimes it's PhD students or high school students or PIs. And I think it's in our festival, what we tend to do is in a program we'll have, you know, documentary, fiction, and then in between sometimes we show this raw data that Nepal was mentioning. We kind of incorporate it, and we try to kind of build a narrative with all of the films together. So if we're talking about, you know, for example, about you know, migration, for example, we may show things that are happening like skin migration, and then we may show something about, you know, migration happening between countries. So we love making those parallels in the festival that we do, and broadening. So, you know, that whether it's fiction or raw footage or a documentary, and actually on a side story, Nepal actually won our Nature Scientific Merit Award a few years ago for a beautiful movie that he made on kind of baby squid, and it won an award from Nature magazine that was one of our award sponsors. So yeah, and I think we need to tell scientists that they should also not be afraid of entering into the art world and collaborating with artists. And so, yeah.
I love that idea of the multi-purpose usage of the footage and the scientific footage. On the other side of that, Beth, you used a lot of clips, news clips, and footage that it was about science. That of course was things that we'd all seen in the news. And if you could talk about how you would find the right images to explain the story, and also about how you made sure that you got the science right.
Mm-hmm. So we did, a lot of kind of evocative imagery, I would say, to just, to help move the story. I mean, for us, it was, having a lot of energy infused throughout is really important to us for the pilot and throughout the series. We have a very specific interest in appealing to a younger audience. And so some of that is driving some of the style and the tone. And we really want to see this being used in schools by educators, have curriculum and study guides built around it, and to really have a whole kind of our future, our fight, educational life. And so I think that's something that we are very interested in. We also do a lot with impact campaigns, and so I really believe that media can be used to move the needle on social issues. And I think that, in this case, that's something that we'll be doing over the long term, and having partners with us to do it. I mean, as a filmmaker, I want to create media that has impact. And when it comes to shaping these campaigns, it's impossible to do it, alone. We need to be working with people who are, on the ground, focused on these issues every single day. So in this case, it's definitely scientists, definitely, environmental activists. And so we'll, as that shapes up, we'll have more to report on that. But in terms of the imagery, and how, not just the imagery itself, but then how it's edited and sort of, fast-paced cuts and things like that. And, little, different music shifts that happen. I would say that there's more music being used in this piece than I might typically use in a project. But again, it's that helping to drive things forward. In terms of getting the science right, I mean, we interviewed a lot of scientists for the project, did a ton of research and reading. We also had, we did a lot of scripting for this. So, when Joan is there in the green screen studio, we worked out the script for him, and that script was reviewed by a scientist, before he went in and recorded. So there are some kind of critical, checkpoints along the way, that we are engaging some scientific advisors to be able to review the material, to do the fact checking that's needed to make sure that we do get it right.
When you were mentioning that, it made me realize how many different purposes and uses and intent. We as filmmakers, we kind of ask ourselves, okay, what's the goal? Is it to entertain? Is it to inform? Is it to motivate? Is it to as a piece? And so all of your pieces have very different approaches, and they're all wonderful and beautiful. And yes, the power of film to inspire and to hopefully, change policies and educate. And pertinent to education, we have a question from a viewer, Donna Serban Davis asked, how do schools learn about your films?
So it can be kind of a variety of ways. We tend to work with educational distributors, and then the materials are available through places where educators are already getting their content. We also sometimes will, go to different conferences, that exist. So it's there's social studies, conference that exists, and we can present our materials there. But there are, we've worked with in the past with Facing History and Ourselves, Journeys in Film. We've worked with PBS Learning Media. So sometimes it depends on where we're distributing. It's possible that the media outlet with whom we're distributing already has an educational arm attached to it, and they can help to, to get this out. There is the real, you run the risk when you just do it in a very siloed way of creating content that never goes anywhere. Teachers are obviously, inundated. There's so much to be done. The test taking that happens for, at the state and national level is often driving what the curriculum is. And so there's, it's hard to find those windows to get into the classroom. But I have found that when we're working with, we've had great success with both Facing History and Ourselves and PBS Learning Media, where we know for sure that teachers are using the materials in the classrooms. I don't mean to throw Journeys in Film under the bus. They're fantastic, but we're just now beginning a project with them. So we haven't yet seen the fruits of that labor. But that's typically how it's done. Also through libraries, we have library distribution that happens as well, and oftentimes educators are finding us that way.
Wonderful.
Megan, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Don't know how much of that you heard, so I'll just repeat the whole thing. For the filmmakers who are watching the panel, could I talk for a moment or hear your stories about getting films made that have to do with science? Do you see an increase in interest in this, and has the attitude of funders and distributors changed? Alexis, why don't I hear your impression first?
Yeah, the funding is always tricky. I mean, I think that because I make fiction, it's a challenging road, the fiction world, because sometimes people don't necessarily understand the impact or the educational aspect of but at the same time, fiction has the ability of reaching like a pretty large audience because it can straddle both education and also entertainment. It has that ability to also kind of reach kind of that, whatever that is, but kind of the entertainment sector. But a lot of my films are funded partly through research grants, like the Sloan Foundation, the Simons Foundation. I also got a little bit of support from, the World Wildlife Fund as well in terms of the monarch butterfly conservation. And then, the typical ways of getting funding from, for film, like film funds, either from different countries, like the Mexican Institute of Cinematography, the MCINE, helped us because we shot in Michoacan where the butterflies arrived. And then, of course, there are many philanthropists and many people that are interested in science communication that, and I would say that it's kind of half-half. Part of the funding is investors, like 50% is investors, and the other half is through research grants and film funds. But it's not easy to get funding for the fictional aspects, for the kind of the science in fiction part. But yeah, it's for the moment in my career, it's been very, very independent, and it's and a lot of it is driven by the director, including myself, and in a small group of people have to really look for those funds and make it happen. But what I also, one other thing that I was going to mention also is sometimes if you shoot, for example, at a university, and this comes back to Beth's point, if you shoot at at Cornell or at NYU, then there's also a benefit for the school because you're highlighting. In my case, I shot at NYU. It's about a Mexican scientist, and and the school is very proud of that kind of association. I just did something with UC Berkeley, with the Berkeley Film Archive, because part of the work is with Nepal and UC Berkeley, and then also Cornell is very interested in the film because I worked with a scientist there called Bob Reed. So a lot of also in terms of getting my films out there, I love also having those screenings back at those universities because I feel like it's giving back, and it's also an amazing opportunity to give back to the schools and universities, but have like a proper film screening, where you invite people and conversations. I think more of that needs to happen in academic settings, of course, in classrooms as well. But I also feel like, just bringing people together in universities and organizing screenings and having filmmakers and scientists come together is very important and can inspire a lot of students. So.
Beth or Josh, would you like to talk about partnerships or how you find getting films that have to do with science, getting them made as a filmmaker, and the opportunities there? Beth, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi. So yeah, I mean, fundraising is I think it's a kind of a beast for documentary films. I think in this case we were so fortunate to collaborate and have this as a co-production of the Woods Hole Film Festival Film and Science Initiative. And Judy played a pivotal role in helping to secure funding for the pilot episode. We are now actively looking for other funding for the remaining 9 episodes in season 1. And I'm really hoping that comes through kind of a pre-sale or a co-production with a distribution network. So we'll see some, hoping for a little bit of a different distribution or a little bit of a different funding route. But typically with, other films that I'm making, I'm constantly submitting grant proposals. I think in the past, 4 weeks, I've submitted 5 grant proposals to different places. So it's a never ending sort of cycle with grant writing and, reaching out to individuals, who are interested in the themes that we're addressing in the films, and trying to put together, as Lexa said, kind of a mishmash of funding. It comes from individuals, it comes from traditional funding sources for films, and also from funding sources that are very specifically interested in the work that's happening. So you might have a foundation that supports film, but also supports, environmental initiatives. And, perhaps the film people aren't that interested in funding the film, but the people who are interested in the science aspect of it and the environmental climate change aspect of it, their program director might want to get behind the film. So we have to, kind of think creatively about, how to put it all together. And it's, I think most filmmakers would agree it's the most challenging part of what we do.
Absolutely. Josh, I would love to hear something briefly, and then I think we'll if we don't have any other questions from the viewers, then we will wrap it up fairly soon.
Yeah, I would say that fundraising for documentary is one of the hardest things that one can do. The fact that if you are doing a film about science or that intersects with science, in some ways there are advantages because there are specific funds that exist to fund those, and some of them have been mentioned by Beth and Alexis. In my case, I was also part of the Woods Hole Initiative, Film and Science Initiative. So I'm very grateful to Judy for making this project happen. And the support was, it doesn't usually happen that easily, but in this case, this project could happen because of that. And but yeah, there are some advantages because there is Sloan, and I'm not going to be able to name all the places, but there are Simon's Foundation. There are several places where you could just Google and find a bunch of places where you could apply or pitch your project. There's also, this is an interesting time in media where there's such a desire for content through the streaming services, and also every publication that is looking for video content as well. So there are opportunities to create a web series, perhaps partnering with an existing publication online, or or to pitch things to Netflix and all the other places. They are interested in science content, especially if there's a good story there. That's all they care about. So, find a good story and pitch it, and you might have some luck.
Wonderful. Yeah, so Judy, what everyone kind of goes back to you in terms of this, putting this together with the Science and Film Initiative. Would you like to mention anything about the future or the challenges or anything there that you would like to talk about? Oh. Okay, that's we'll just skip over that. Well, we are very excited to see what comes out next. This has been absolutely fantastic with the first of all, with the Science and Film Initiative, and as I mentioned, as a board member, I'm really excited to see where this goes. I thank you all so much for your participation, for your beautiful films, for bringing everything to the table. And I'm so pleased to continue this conversation in the future with the Science and Film Initiative and the other filmmakers and scientists, and see what else comes of this. And I'd like to see much more collaboration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, wait, Judy has now one thing. Judy, you're muted.
Okay, is this working now? Yes. I just wanted to thank everybody for participating in this because, it's especially given the world we live in today, more important than ever for science to be known and for science stories to be told. And one great way for that to happen is through the visual medium of film. And the question going forward will be, what is that? What does film mean in this context? How can we create the next generation of filmmakers and scientists who will collaborate this way? And when this will become a normal way of telling stories, it will be very exciting. And I feel like we're at the beginning of something really, really new, fresh, and wonderful. And we in Woods Hole are just so lucky to be where we are because we live this every day. And so NEPAM, thank you, and thank you to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution for being so interested in what we do, and we hope that next year we'll see some new films as well. But in the meantime, all the films that we have in this festival are available to be seen through Saturday. And then we're hopeful that in addition to Son of Monarchs, which will have a theatrical release and in HBO Max, that we'll see Bruce and Alvin and Wildfires on a screen or a television near you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.